The cane was gone. Humans didn't see it, I smelled it in her office. But let me start from the beginning, from the moment I knew something was wrong, from that Tuesday morning when the air itself tasted different. My name is Max, and I'm a guide dog. That's what humans call me anyway. What I really am is Sarah's eyes, her compass, her guardian in a world that moves too fast and cares too little. I've been with her for 3 years now, ever since she lost her sight to that disease with the long name I can't pronounce. But I don't need to pronounce it. I just need to know that when she reaches for me, I'm there, always. That morning started like any other. Sarah's alarm buzzed at 6:30, and I was already awake, watching the shadow patterns shift across our apartment floor as dawn crept through the blinds. I've learned to love these quiet moments before the day demands things from us both. Sarah moved through her routine with the precision of someone who's mapped every inch of her space. 12 steps from bedroom to bathroom, turn left at the corner where the wall meets cool tile, reach up and slightly right for the toothbrush. I stayed close, not because she needed me inside the apartment, but because my presence steadies her. I can hear it in her breathing, the way it evens out when she knows I'm near. We left for work at 7:45 sharp. Sarah gripped my harness with her left hand, her white cane tapping a familiar rhythm with her right. The cane wasn't just a tool, it was an extension of her awareness, a probe that asked questions of the world before her feet did. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. The sound echoed off the concrete, bouncing back information about curbs and obstacles, about where the sidewalk dipped and where it rose. I guided her around the construction zone on Boylston Street, the one that smelled of fresh asphalt and metal scaffolding. A bicycle messenger swerved too close, and I pressed my body against Sarah's legs, creating space between her and danger. She didn't flinch. She trusted me completely, the way I trusted her to know when to give me commands and when to let my instincts lead. The morning air carried hints of everything: coffee from the shop on the corner, exhaust from the bus that rumbled past, the perfume of a woman who hurried by smelling of roses and anxiety. But underneath it all, I caught something else, something that made my ears prick forward even though I couldn't name it yet. A sharpness, a wrongness, the kind of scent that doesn't belong, like spoiled milk in a clean refrigerator. I filed it away in the part of my brain that catalogues threats, the part that never sleeps even when I do. TechVision Analytics occupied the 12th floor of a glass building that reflected clouds and made everything look cleaner than it was. The elevator always smelled like too many humans in too small a space. Layers of cologne and sweat and coffee breath. Sarah counted floors by the soft ding of each level. 12 was ours. The doors opened onto carpet that muffled footsteps, but carried vibrations I could feel through my pores. Sarah's desk was 23 steps from the elevator, past the reception area, where Jennifer always greeted us with genuine warmth and a voice that smiled, around the corner where the hallway opened into the bullpen of cubicles. But today we weren't going to her desk. Today, Patricia Hendricks had called an emergency meeting. I smelled Patricia before I saw her. Expensive perfume trying too hard to cover the scent of cigarettes she smoked during breaks, the ones she thought nobody knew about. Sarah had told me once that Patricia didn't like having me in the office. Dogs don't belong in professional environments, Patricia had said during Sarah's first week, her voice dripping with the kind of politeness that isn't polite at all. But the law was on our side, and Patricia had to swallow whatever words came after that. The conference room was cold, air-conditioned to the point where I could see my breath if I panted. Sarah navigated to her usual chair, the one closest to the door, and carefully propped her white cane against the table's edge. She always positioned it the same way, handle hooked over the table rim, the cane leaning at a 40-degree angle against her chair, always within reach, always exactly where she expected it to be. I settled at her feet, my body a warm anchor in the frigid room, and watched the humans file in. David Chen nodded at Sarah, even though she couldn't see it, a habit he hadn't broken. Jennifer brought water glasses, setting Sarah's directly in front of her, with a soft tap against the table so Sarah would know its location. And Patricia swept in last, her heels clicking like warning shots against the tile, carrying a leather portfolio and that smile that never reached her eyes. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Patricia began, and I felt Sarah's hand drop to my head, her fingers threading through the fur behind my ears. She did that when she was nervous, when she needed to ground herself in something solid and real. I pressed my skull into her palm, letting her know I was here, I was present, I was watching everything she couldn't see. The meeting droned on, talk of quarterly projections and client deliverables, words that meant nothing to me but everything to the humans who spoke them. I stayed alert, not to the words but to the undercurrents beneath them, the way Patricia's voice hardened when she addressed Sarah directly, the way Robert Hayes, the senior director, shifted uncomfortably in his chair whenever Patricia spoke, the way Jennifer's pen stopped moving across her notepad when Patricia suggested that certain accommodations were becoming complicated. 20 minutes into the meeting, Sarah reached for her cane. It was instinct, a grounding gesture, the same way her hand found my head, but her fingers grasped only air. I felt her body tense, felt confusion ripple through her like electricity through water. She moved her hand in a wider arc, searching. Nothing. The cane was gone. And in that moment, in the split second before the humans even registered what had happened, I knew. I knew with the certainty that comes from a nose that never lies and ears that hear what eyes miss. Someone had taken it, and I knew exactly who. Sarah's hand swept across the space beside her chair one more time, more deliberately now, her fingers trembling slightly as they searched the empty air. I watched her face shift from confusion to something deeper, a flash of vulnerability she worked hard to never show in this place. Her jaw tightened. Her breathing changed, became shallower, faster. I felt her leg begin to bounce beneath the table, a nervous energy she couldn't contain. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the kind that presses against your ears and makes humans look anywhere except at the person who needs help. Patricia was the first to speak, and isn't that interesting? The first to notice, the first to offer concern, her voice dripping with exactly the right amount of worry. "Sarah, is something wrong?" she asked, tilting her head in that way humans do when they're performing empathy rather than feeling it. I'd seen that head tilt before, always calculated, always measured. Sarah's voice remained steady, professional, even as I felt her pulse hammering through her wrist where it rested against my back. "My cane," she said simply. "It was right here. I placed it against the table when I sat down." Her tone carried no accusation, just a statement of fact, but I heard the undercurrent of rising panic she was fighting to suppress. Without that cane, she was more vulnerable than she'd ever admit aloud. It wasn't just about mobility, though that mattered. It was about autonomy, about the illusion of control in a world that had already taken so much from her. Patricia made a show of looking around the room, her eyes scanning the floor, the corners, even glancing under the table with exaggerated thoroughness. "How strange," she murmured. "Are you certain you brought it in? Perhaps you left it at your desk, or maybe even at home." The suggestion hung in the air like poison gas, invisible but deadly. Sarah's hand tightened in my fur, and I felt a growl building in my chest that I had to suppress. My training, years of conditioning, demanded I stay silent, stay still, stay professional. But every instinct I possessed screamed that something was fundamentally wrong. "I never forget my cane," Sarah replied, her voice hardening just enough that even the humans in the room must have heard it. It was here when the meeting started. David Chen shifted in his seat, his chair creaking as he leaned forward. I'd always liked David. He smelled honest, like soap and coffee, and something earthy I couldn't name. When he spoke, his words came carefully, deliberately, as if he was testing the temperature of dangerous waters. "I think I remember seeing it when we came in," he offered, and I heard Patricia's sharp intake of breath, so slight the humans probably missed it. But I caught it, catalogued it, added it to the growing list of evidence my senses were collecting. Jennifer, the assistant who always remembered to set Sarah's water glass just right, cleared her throat softly. I think I saw it too, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might summon consequences she wasn't ready to face. Patricia's smile didn't waver, but I smelled the shift in her chemistry, the acrid tang of adrenaline mixing with her perfume. Well, it must be here somewhere then, she said brightly, too brightly. Why don't we take a quick break? I'm sure it'll turn up. Jennifer, would you mind helping Sarah look? But I didn't need Jennifer's help. I didn't need human eyes that see but don't observe, that look but don't perceive. I had something better. I had a nose that could track a scent through layers of time and space, through the artificial fragrance of air fresheners and the chemical smell of carpet cleaning solutions. I had ears that heard the whisper of fabric against wood, the soft metallic click of a drawer being opened and closed too quickly, and I had been watching, always watching, even when everyone assumed I was just a dog lying quietly at my human's feet. The moment Patricia had entered the conference room, 7 minutes before the meeting officially started, I'd been aware of her movements. I'd heard her heels click to Sarah's chair. I'd heard the subtle scrape of the cane being lifted. I'd heard her walk, not back to her own seat, but toward the door, toward the hallway, toward her office that adjoined the conference room. And most damning of all, I'd heard the distinctive sound of her desk drawer sliding open, the soft thud of something being placed inside, and the metallic snap of the lock engaging. Sarah's cane had a very specific scent. White canes are made of aluminum or fiberglass, materials that don't hold odor well, but Sarah's was different. She'd customized it with a wooden handle, a beautiful piece of polished cherry wood that her sister had carved for her birthday 2 years ago. That wood had been treated with a special varnish that carried hints of linseed oil and pine resin. And because Sarah was Sarah, because she made everything in her life distinctly hers, she'd tied a small lavender sachet to the handle, a gift from her mother, meant to bring calm during stressful days. That combination of cherry wood, varnish, and lavender was as unique as a fingerprint, and right now, as I slowly rose from my position at Sarah's feet, I could smell it. Not in this room. Not under the table or near the door or anywhere a cane might have fallen or rolled. No. The scent trail led out of the conference room, down the short hallway, and directly into Patricia Hendricks' office. More specifically, it led to her desk. Even more specifically, it led to the locked drawer on the right side, the one she'd opened and closed so quickly 23 minutes ago, thinking no one was paying attention. I looked up at Sarah, trying to communicate with my eyes what I couldn't say with words. She couldn't see my expression, but she knew me well enough to read my body language, to feel the tension in my muscles, the way I'd shifted my weight forward, the way my attention had become laser-focused on something beyond this room. "Max?" she said softly, questioningly, and I responded the only way I could, by moving. Guide dogs don't break protocol lightly. We're trained to ignore distractions, to maintain discipline, to respond only to commands, but we're also trained to alert our handlers to danger, to obstacles, to threats they can't perceive. And right now, the greatest threat to Sarah wasn't a curb she might trip over or a door she might walk into. It was the theft of her dignity, the systematic undermining of her competence, the quiet violence of someone who would steal her independence and then feign concern about its absence. I took one step toward the door, then looked back at Sarah. She tilted her head, confused, but I saw the moment understanding flickered across her face. She trusted me. After 3 years together, through countless streets and strangers and situations, she trusted me completely. "Max is trying to tell me something," Sarah said to the room, her voice stronger now, steadier. She stood, one hand finding my harness with practiced ease. Patricia's voice came sharp and fast, too fast, the words tumbling over each other in her haste to regain control. "Sarah, really, there's no need to make a scene. I'm sure your cane is just misplaced. Why don't you stay seated and we'll—" But Sarah was already moving, following my lead as I walked with deliberate purpose toward the door. I didn't run, I didn't pull. I simply walked with absolute certainty, each step a declaration, each movement a promise. I know where it is. I know what happened. I know who took it. And before this day is over, everyone else will know too. The conference room door swung open, and I led Sarah into the hallway, turning left toward Patricia's office, toward the truth locked in a drawer, toward the moment when human deception would meet the immutable honesty of a dog's nose. Behind us, I heard chairs scraping, footsteps following, voices rising in confusion and curiosity. But I didn't look back. I had a job to do, and nothing, not training, not protocol, not even Patricia Hendricks' desperate attempts to stop what was coming, would prevent me from doing it. Patricia's office door stood open, an invitation I accepted without hesitation. The room smelled like her, that overwhelming perfume, stale cigarette smoke clinging to fabric, and underneath it all, the metallic tang of stress. I walked directly to her desk, not pausing to sniff the visitor chairs or investigate the bookshelf lined with management theory books that looked like they'd never been opened. Sarah's hand trembled slightly on my harness, but she followed, trusting me even though she couldn't know where I was leading her or why. That trust was a weight I carried gladly, a responsibility that made every moment of my training worthwhile. Behind us, footsteps filled the hallway. David Chen, Jennifer, even Robert Hayes, the senior director, whose presence suddenly made everything feel more official, more serious, more real. And Patricia, of course, her heels clicking frantically as she rushed to catch up, her voice pitched high with barely controlled panic. "Sarah, this is highly inappropriate," Patricia said, trying to inject authority into words that came out strangled. "You can't just barge into my office without—" But Sarah cut her off with a calmness that made me proud, her voice level and clear. "Max doesn't act like this without reason. He's never wrong." I stopped directly in front of Patricia's desk, positioned myself at the exact spot where the scent was strongest, where the trail ended, where the truth lived. The desk was one of those expensive executive models, all dark wood and brass handles, with 3 drawers on each side, but I only cared about one drawer. The right side, second from the bottom, the one with the lock. I could smell the cherry wood and lavender so clearly now that it was almost overwhelming, like standing in an orchard while someone crushes flowers beneath their feet. The cane was there, right there, inches away from where Patricia stood, her body rigid, her hands clenched at her sides. I did something then that guide dogs almost never do. I broke protocol completely. I placed my front paws on the desk drawer, scratching lightly at the wood, a behavior I'd been trained years ago to never ever exhibit. But desperate times required desperate measures, and if Sarah needed proof, I would give it to her in the only language I had. A low whine escaped my throat, not quite a bark, but close, a sound of urgency that everyone in that crowded doorway could hear. Sarah's face showed confusion, mixed with dawning realization. "The drawer?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I barked once, sharp and clear, breaking another sacred rule of guide dog conduct. We don't bark in offices, we don't draw attention, we don't disrupt professional environments. But I wasn't just a guide dog in that moment. I was a witness, and witnesses must speak their truth regardless of convenience or social norms. David Chen's voice came from behind us, measured but firm. "Patricia, what's in that drawer?" The question hung in the air like smoke, visible to everyone, impossible to ignore. Patricia laughed, but it was a brittle sound, glass breaking under pressure. "This is ridiculous. You're all going to trust a dog over common sense? Sarah probably left her cane at home and now she's embarrassed, so she's—" Robert Hayes interrupted, and his voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen enough to know when someone was hiding something. "Patricia, just open the drawer." It wasn't a request. The senior director had spoken, and suddenly this wasn't about a missing cane anymore. It was about credibility, about trust, about what happens when authority figures abuse the power they've been given. Patricia's hands shook as she fumbled with her keys, her fingers struggling to find the right one, buying time she didn't have, searching for excuses that didn't exist. Jennifer spoke up, her voice stronger than before, emboldened by Robert Hayes' presence. "I saw you go into the conference room before the meeting started, Patricia, before anyone else arrived." The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread and grew. Patricia's face flushed red, then pale, cycling through colors like a broken traffic light. I needed to prepare. But her words trailed off because there was nothing she could say. No explanation that would make sense, no lie that would cover the truth that was about to be revealed. The key finally turned in the lock. The drawer slid open with a whisper of wood against metal, and there, lying on top of folders and papers and whatever else Patricia kept hidden in her private space, was Sarah's white cane with its distinctive wooden handle and the small lavender sachet tied to its grip. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Sarah's sharp intake of breath and the sound of my tail thumping against the floor in vindication. Eyes miss, I thought, looking up at my human whose own eyes couldn't see but who knew, who trusted, who believed. But noses never lie. Robert Hayes reached into the drawer and lifted the cane with careful, deliberate movements, as if it were evidence at a crime scene, which, in a way, it was. He held it up where everyone could see, the polished cherry wood handle gleaming under the fluorescent lights, the lavender sachet swaying gently, unmistakable and undeniable. Sarah's hand found my head, her fingers digging into my fur with an intensity that told me she was fighting to maintain composure, to not let the emotions flooding through her spill out in this room full of witnesses. I leaned into her leg, offering what comfort I could, my solid presence a reminder that she wasn't alone, had never been alone, would never be alone as long as I drew breath. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air, searching for words that wouldn't come, excuses that couldn't exist. Her face had gone from red to a sickly gray, and I could smell the fear rolling off her in waves, sharp and acrid, mixing with her perfume until the combination made my nose twitch. I don't know how that got there, she finally managed, but her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the lie even as she spoke it. David Chen made a sound of disgust, and I saw him shake his head slowly, disappointment etched across his features. Jennifer had tears in her eyes, whether from anger or relief or both, I couldn't tell. But Robert Hayes' expression was the most telling, cold, professional, and absolutely furious, in that controlled way that powerful humans have when they know someone has crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. He handed the cane to Sarah, guiding her hand to the handle with surprising gentleness for someone so clearly angry. Sarah's fingers closed around the familiar wood, and I felt something release in her body. Tension she'd been holding since the moment she'd reached for the cane and found it missing. She ran her thumb over the lavender sachet, a gesture so intimate and relieved that it made my heart ache in that place where dogs feel things they can't name. "Thank you, Max," she whispered, and though the words were soft, everyone in that cramped office doorway heard them. They heard the weight behind them, the gratitude, the validation, the acknowledgement that I had done what I was supposed to do, protect her, always protect her, even when that protection meant breaking every rule I'd been taught. Robert Hayes turned to Patricia, and when he spoke, his voice could have frozen fire. "My office now, and bring your personal belongings." It wasn't a suggestion. Patricia opened her mouth as if to argue, then seemed to realize the futility of it. The evidence was literal and damning, held in Sarah's hands for everyone to see. There would be no talking her way out of this, no spinning the narrative, no claiming misunderstanding or accident. She had taken something vital from a disabled colleague and hidden it in a locked drawer, and everyone knew it. Everyone had seen it. Everyone understood exactly what it meant. As Patricia gathered her things with trembling hands, her expensive leather portfolio suddenly looking cheap and tawdry, Sarah remained still and silent, but I felt the tremors running through her, felt the delayed shock setting in now that the immediate crisis had passed. David Chen moved closer, his voice gentle when he spoke. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I should have noticed sooner. I should have." Sarah shook her head, cutting him off. "You spoke up when it mattered, that's what counts." Her words were generous, more generous than I would have been if I could speak, but that was Sarah. Even when wounded, even when betrayed, she found ways to acknowledge the good in others. Jennifer approached next, her voice shaky but determined. "I saw her go in before the meeting. I should have said something immediately. I was scared." Sarah reached out, finding Jennifer's arm with her free hand, the one not gripping her recovered cane like a lifeline. "You found your courage when it counted most. Thank you." Robert Hayes paused at the doorway, Patricia trailing behind him like a condemned prisoner, and turned back to address the small crowd. "I'll be calling HR and our legal team immediately. This kind of behavior is not only unacceptable, but potentially criminal. Sarah, please take the rest of the day off, paid of course, and I'll be in touch this afternoon to discuss next steps." He paused, then added something that made my tail wag despite the heavy atmosphere. "And Max? Good dog, very good dog." It wasn't much, just 3 words from a senior director, who probably rarely acknowledged anyone below his pay grade, let alone a dog. But those words meant something. They meant I had been seen, not just as a tool or an accommodation, but as an individual who had made a choice, taken a stand, protected someone who needed protecting. Sarah's hand stroked my head, and I knew she was crying now. Silent tears that only I could detect from the change in her breathing, the slight hitch in her chest. We stood there as the office slowly emptied, as Patricia was led away to face whatever consequences awaited her, as David and Jennifer quietly returned to their desks, with backward glances full of concern and solidarity. And in that moment in Patricia's sterile office, that still smelled of her fear and lies, Sarah knelt down and wrapped her arms around my neck, burying her face in my fur. "You did it," she whispered. "You found the truth when everyone else was blind." I licked her cheek, tasting salt in relief, and thought about what it meant to see without eyes, to know without words, to trust so completely that you'll follow your partner into uncertain territory, armed with nothing but faith. Humans think they're the ones who train us, who teach us, who shape us into what they need, but the truth is more complicated. We shape each other, human and dog, learning trust and loyalty and love in languages that don't require words. Sarah had taught me what it meant to be needed, to have purpose beyond instinct. And I had taught her, I hoped, that being vulnerable doesn't mean being weak, and that sometimes the truth comes not through eyes that see, but through noses that know. We went home early that day, something that almost never happened. Sarah called a car service instead of taking the bus, and I was grateful because I could feel the exhaustion radiating from her, the kind of tiredness that comes not from physical exertion, but from emotional battle. In the back seat, she kept one hand on my head and the other wrapped around her cane, as if needing to confirm its reality, to prove to herself that it was truly back where it belonged. The driver asked if we were okay, probably noticing Sarah's red eyes and quiet demeanor, and she simply nodded, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach the rest of her face. When we arrived at our apartment building, I guided her up the familiar steps with extra care, hyper-aware of her fragile state, ready to catch her if she stumbled not physically, but emotionally. Inside, Sarah collapsed onto the couch, and for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't immediately start on the evening routine. No dinner preparation, no checking emails, no organizing tomorrow's work clothes. She just sat there, her cane propped carefully beside her, one hand absently stroking my ears as I rested my head on her lap. The silence stretched between us, comfortable and necessary, the kind of quiet that allows wounds to begin healing. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, texts from David checking on her, a formal email from Robert Hayes detailing the investigation process, a message from Jennifer apologizing again. Sarah ignored them all, choosing instead this moment of stillness, this pocket of peace after the storm. I understood. Sometimes humans need to simply exist without performing, without responding, without being anything other than tired and hurt and relieved all at once. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful, processing aloud the way she sometimes did when working through complex emotions. You know what the worst part is, Max? It wasn't just about the cane. She wanted me to feel helpless, to look incompetent in front of everyone. She wanted to prove that I didn't belong there, that my disability made me a burden. Her fingers tightened in my fur, and I pressed closer, offering what comfort a dog can give, wordless, steady, unconditional. But you proved something else entirely. You proved that I have the best partner anyone could ask for, that I'm not alone, that I never have to face this world by myself. She laughed then, a wet sound mixed with tears, but genuine. A dog saw what humans chose to ignore. A dog had more integrity than my manager. What does that say about the world we live in? The evening light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the apartment floor. Sarah eventually got up, moved through her routines with practiced efficiency, fed me dinner and made herself tea. But something had shifted. Some fundamental understanding had crystallized. When Robert Hayes called later that evening, Sarah answered with a strength I hadn't heard before. She listened to his apologies, his assurances that Patricia had been suspended pending a full investigation, his promises of policy reviews and mandatory training. And when he asked if she wanted to pursue legal action, Sarah considered it carefully before responding. I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else, she said firmly. Not just here, but anywhere. People need to understand that disability rights aren't optional, and that discrimination, even subtle discrimination, has real consequences. After she hung up, Sarah sat on the floor beside me, her back against the couch, and pulled out her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with determined purpose, and though I couldn't read what she was writing, I could feel the energy shift in the room. This wasn't defeat or victimization. This was someone channeling pain into power, transforming a terrible experience into fuel for change. She wrote for hours, pausing occasionally to scratch behind my ears or take sips of now cold tea. And when she finally closed the laptop, she looked down at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not just gratitude or relief, but something bigger. Recognition, maybe. Respect. Partnership in its truest form. Tomorrow we go back, she said quietly, and we show them what strength looks like. I thumped my tail in agreement because that's what we do. We get up. We continue. We prove that obstacles are just temporary barriers, and that truth once revealed cannot be hidden again. Eyes might miss the important things, might overlook injustice or turn away from uncomfortable truths, but noses follow the scent of truth wherever it leads, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. 3 months later, everything had changed, and nothing had changed. Sarah still arrived at TechVision Analytics at 7:45, still counted the elevator dings to the 12th floor, still navigated the 23 steps to her desk, with me at her side. But the atmosphere was different now, charged with something new. Awareness, maybe, or accountability. Patricia Hendricks was gone, terminated after a thorough investigation, revealed a pattern of microaggressions and discriminatory behavior that extended far beyond the stolen cane. In her place, the company had hired Marcus Thompson, a director who happened to be deaf and who understood intimately what it meant to navigate a world not designed for you. He communicated through an interpreter and had immediately implemented changes that rippled through the entire organization: mandatory accessibility training, updated accommodation policies, and a zero-tolerance approach to discrimination of any kind. Sarah had been promoted to Senior Analyst, leading the very project that Patricia had tried to sabotage. David Chen was now her official teammate, and Jennifer had found her voice, becoming an advocate for inclusive workplace practices. The conference room, where everything had unraveled now, had a small plaque by the door, installed at Robert Hayes's insistence, reminding everyone that dignity and respect are not accommodations, they are requirements. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the smallest one. The company had established the Max Recognition Program, acknowledging service animals not as mere tools or accommodations, but as essential partners deserving respect and consideration. I'd been the first recipient, receiving a custom ID badge and a formal letter of commendation that Sarah kept framed on her desk. Today, Sarah was presenting her quarterly findings to the executive team, standing at the front of that same conference room with confidence that radiated from every gesture. Her cane rested securely against the podium, visible to everyone, a silent reminder of what had happened and what had changed. I lay at her feet, calm and watchful, as she spoke about data trends and market projections with the expertise that had always been there, just waiting for others to stop questioning and start listening. When she finished, the room erupted in genuine applause, and Robert Hayes approached afterward with words of praise that acknowledged not just her work, but her courage. "You could have left," he said quietly. "You could have sued us into oblivion. Instead, you chose to stay and help us become better. That takes a special kind of strength." Sarah smiled, her hand finding my head in that familiar gesture of connection. "I had a good example," she replied, and I knew she was talking about me, about loyalty, about standing your ground when it matters most. As we walked out of the building that evening, past colleagues who now greeted Sarah by name and acknowledged me with respectful nods, I thought about what had transpired. One act of cruelty had sparked a transformation. One moment of truth-telling had cascaded into systemic change. Humans often ask what dogs think about, what occupies our minds during the quiet moments. The answer is simpler than they imagine. We think about our humans, their safety, their happiness, their dignity. We think about the promises we made when we put on our harnesses and accepted our roles. And we think about truth, that fundamental thing that exists, regardless of who sees it or acknowledges it. The cane incident had taught everyone a lesson, but not the one they expected. It wasn't about assistive devices or workplace policies, or even discrimination, though all those things mattered. It was about perception versus reality, about who gets believed and why, about the different ways of knowing truth. Humans see with their eyes and often miss what's right in front of them. But I see with my nose, with my ears, with senses that cut through deception and pretense to find what's real. Eyes miss the important things. They can be fooled by appearances, blinded by bias, closed to uncomfortable truths. But noses don't lie. They follow scent trails to hidden places, uncover buried secrets, reveal what others work hard to conceal. And in a world that often values looking right over being right, sometimes the clearest vision comes from those who see without eyes at all. That's my job. That's my purpose. That's why every morning I wake up ready to guide, to protect, to sniff out truth wherever it hides. Because Sarah deserves nothing less, and neither does anyone else who dares to navigate a world that wasn't built for them, armed with nothing but courage and a partner who will never, ever let them walk alone.